Witness the power that changes our world. Welcome to the El Niño season.
Welcome to your dose of wowness. I want you to imagine August 2022. Satellite images begin circulating on your newsfeed showing what looks, at first glance, like a totally new sea. Just this vast, unbroken expanse of pale, blue-brown water visible straight from orbit. And it's stretching entirely across what should be the vibrant farmland and villages of Sindh province in southern Pakistan. Under normal conditions, these satellites capture this rich tapestry of green and brown agriculture, but now, picture a muddy mirror reflecting the sun, literally swallowing homes, roads, and entire livelihoods.
The reality on the ground was stark. 1/3 of the entire country was underwater. Just think about that scale for a second. The Indus River overflowed absolutely everything engineered to contain it. Levees breached, dams hit their absolute maximum capacities, and drainage systems simply vanished beneath the surge. 2 million homes were destroyed or severely damaged, and 8 million people were displaced. The monsoon rains that caused this were nearly double the historical average. And the event that set the conditions for all of this, the climate mode that enhanced that monsoon way beyond anything the country's infrastructure was built to handle, that was La Niña. Now, you've definitely heard of El Niño, but you might not have heard of La Niña. It's the other half of that same cycle, the cold twin.
This brings up a flat, totally devastating asymmetry. Pakistan contributed less than 1% of the global greenhouse gas emissions that are warming our atmosphere, yet they lost $30 billion to a flood amplified by that background warming. Less than a 1% contribution and $30 billion in devastation. And the whole thing was actually compounded by a record-breaking pre-monsoon heat wave. That heat melted Himalayan glaciers, which preloaded the rivers with massive amounts of runoff before the heavy rains even arrived.
The mechanism: Walker's circulation in reverse. Now, if you've been following along with this explainer series, I want you to jump back to days 96 and 97 in your mind. Remember how the El Niño mechanics worked? Well, La Niña is that exact same Walker circulation, but instead of collapsing, it's strengthening.
Yeah, La Niña is literally the Walker circulation doing the exact opposite of what El Niño does. Rather than warming the eastern Pacific, it cools it down. It amplifies the system rather than suppressing it. Once you have that El Niño picture from our previous explainers, La Niña makes perfect sense. Same regions, same mechanism, but a totally opposite outcome. It's the Bjerknes feedback, that loop between ocean temperatures and trade winds running in reverse. During La Niña, the east-west temperature contrast across the Pacific gets highly pronounced. Intense trade winds push warm water far to the west, deepening the warm pool there and pulling up even colder water in the east. And that eastern Pacific thermocline, that invisible underwater boundary between the warm surface water and the freezing depths below, it gets even shallower. That makes the cold upwelling highly efficient. The whole cycle just locks in and self-reinforces.
Let's chart the global inversion map region by region. You'll see exactly what I mean. Where El Niño dries out eastern Australia, La Niña floods it. Where El Niño starved the Indian monsoon back in 1877, La Niña overwhelms it with moisture, just like we saw in Pakistan. In the Horn of Africa, where El Niño brings heavy rainfall, La Niña forces a severe, multi-season drought. And over in the tropical Atlantic, where El Niño usually suppresses storm development, La Niña rips away the barriers and just lets hurricanes thrive.
Take Australia as our first really clear example. The very same continent you watched burn catastrophically during El Niño events became the flood continent during La Niña. During the 2010 to 2011 La Niña cycle, a staggering 75% of Queensland flooded. We are talking about an inundated area larger than France and Germany combined. Think about the sheer volume of moisture the atmosphere has to transport to cover hundreds of thousands of square miles in floodwaters, turning massive stretches of dry outback desert into an inland sea.
Amplifying Atlantic hurricanes. So let's shift gears over to North America, because this is where La Niña dramatically changes the rules for the tropical Atlantic.
La Niña's most dramatic effect on North America is actually one that most Americans experience directly, yet almost nobody connects it to the Pacific Ocean. I'm talking about the Atlantic hurricane season. See, El Niño suppresses hurricanes by increasing upper-level wind shear over the tropical Atlantic, essentially tearing developing storms apart before they can even form. La Niña? It reduces that wind shear. It removes the barrier that typically suppresses those storms, allowing them to organize and rapidly intensify. Track this historical record with me. In 1988, La Niña fueled Hurricane Gilbert, which reached a terrifying central pressure of 888 millibars. And simultaneously, La Niña shifted the jet stream northward, depriving the American West of moisture and creating the massive drought conditions that contributed to the historic Yellowstone fires. Then, there's the 2005 season, the one with Katrina.
That occurred during La Niña transitional conditions, the exceptionally warm Gulf of Mexico waters that fueled Katrina's jump from Category 1 to Category 5 in just 24 hours, partly a consequence of La Niña's reduced wind-driven mixing. The connection is direct, it's documented, and it's almost never mentioned in popular accounts of either season.
But the absolute crucial point here is the sheer, terrifying scale it can reach. The 2020 Atlantic hurricane season was the most active in recorded history. 30 named storms. 30! It completely exhausted the standard naming list and forced meteorologists deep into the supplementary Greek alphabet just to keep tracking the devastation. For coastal communities, 30 named storms means operating in a constant, relentless state of emergency, boarding up windows, evacuating, returning, and evacuating again, week after week. All because the atmospheric breaks that typically limit how many storms can form in a single year were just gone.
The sustained triple dip. So what happens when this climate mode doesn't just transition away, but gets stuck?
Between 2020 and 2023, La Niña did not complete its normal 1 to 2 year cycle. It came back 3 times. A rare triple dip event. It's so rare that the last comparable one was way back in the early 1970s. We experienced 3 consecutive winter peaks of La Niña conditions, which basically gave us a massive natural experiment in what a prolonged cool phase does to global weather patterns. And the cumulative effect across 4 years produced something the Horn of Africa had not seen in 40 years. 4 consecutive failed rainy seasons. Because the Walker circulation displaced the intertropical convergence zone, that's the global belt of low pressure and heavy precipitation that brings rain to the tropics, both the long rains of spring and the short rains of autumn were completely suppressed year after year.
The human toll was massive. Over 36 million people faced acute food insecurity. Famine was declared in parts of Somalia. Surveys estimated up to 5 million livestock died in Kenya alone. 5 million. And remember, all of this happened at the exact same time as Pakistan was drowning and Australia was inundated. One event, multiple catastrophes. Opposite signs happening concurrently around the entire globe.
The coverage asymmetry. Why does a mechanism that caused more cumulative human damage between 2020 and 2023 than the huge 2015-16 El Niño go almost completely underreported?
You really have to ask yourself why there's such a massive global coverage gap. The regions most affected by La Niña, the Horn of Africa, Pakistan, Bangladesh, inland Australia, they systematically receive less attention in English-language media than the populations and the suffering would actually warrant. El Niño has a catchy name, right? Plus it brings direct, highly visible impacts like California floods and warm winters to major Western media markets. La Niña's impacts in North America are way more complex, and its most devastating direct hits occur squarely in the global south.
But that asymmetry is not a neutral fact. It actively shapes which climate risks get prepared for and which ones do not. This lack of coverage directly dictates global climate preparation. You see, when a slow-moving disaster like a multi-year drought actually dominates the news cycle, it triggers international funding mechanisms. Governments and NGOs release pre-positioned aid, reserves of food, water, and funds ready to deploy. But when the news is silent, those financial mechanisms remain locked. This media gap literally decides who gets pre-positioned aid, who gets to activate insurance mechanisms, and which vulnerable populations are ultimately left to face the extremes entirely alone. We are now 3 explainers deep into the Weather That Changed the World arc. If you're just joining us, I highly recommend making sure you subscribe and catch up on days 96 and 97. Understanding the Walker Circulation Foundation and the 1877 famine from those earlier explainers makes the reality of today's cold twin hit that much harder. It really gives you the complete picture of this massive global engine. Here is what La Niña tells us about the climate system. Underneath the flooded satellite images and the failed harvest seasons and the hurricane tracks, the Walker circulation does not have a neutral setting. It is always doing something. Warming the eastern Pacific and shutting down the monsoon, or cooling the eastern Pacific and amplifying it. The ENSO cycle is not a problem that appears every few years and then goes away. It is the background rhythm of the tropical climate system, and every year we live inside it, whether we know it or not. Pakistan in 2022 did not know the name La Niña when the rains came. The families in the Horn of Africa watching their 4th consecutive failed harvest did not know the name La Niña when the rains failed. The mechanism does not require knowledge of itself to operate. It just runs. Tomorrow, day 99. The jet stream, the river of winds 6 miles above your head that determines whether your winter is warm or cold, wet or dry, and whether the heat wave that settles over your city stays for 3 days or 3 weeks. It is connected to everything we've built this week, and a warming Arctic is doing something to it that has no clear historical precedent. Day 99. See you there.